Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. Today, folks, what we're going to jump into, is talking about how lawn care, right? Essentially, lawn care is kind of a metaphor for life, right? Within our lives, within culture, right? And as we often do, we jump in talking about a little bit more about organizations because that's where we come together to form up as teams to accomplish goals to serve customers, right? But in all actuality, our customers span many areas and all the dots connect, right? So take from this information that you will, marinate on it, right? This is designed to help you, your associates, friends, family, community, culture, right, to grow and thrive. So use it in a positive, productive way. With that said, so let's talk about lawns, right? So if you think about it, and not all of you have the same experience, right? So, but you can understand it because you have some frame of reference if you haven't been directly involved. But if you've ever played golf, one of the very, pleasing aspects to going out to a golf course is the manicured grass, right? Everything is nice, crisp. It's lush. It's like a garden, and some actually have flowers and bushes and all that are up, and then others not so much, but they're a little bit more manicured and so forth. But it's the environment, right? It's that environment, the lawn, the lawn or the grounds, right? Groundskeeper has a huge job at a golf course, but but think of that, okay? And you think about what you don't see at a golf course. Hopefully, you shouldn't be. You shouldn't be seeing weeds, 1, 2, 3 feet high, right? Even little crabgrass and the little short weeds, those either, right? And why is that? Because it's the experience, right? Part of it's the experience, part of it's functional, right? The grounds and the contours of the grass are serve a purpose to the way the game of golf is played and so forth. But it's the attention, right? What can we glean when we go to a golf course? Well, we can glean that the golf course and the people who run that organization care, right? Because quite often, and I won't say quite often, but you can go to some public courses where the further away you get from the playing area, where the typical ball striking areas are, the rougher the grass can get, right? And maybe a little par 3 course or something like that next to a swamp, right? You're going to run into some real tough stuff not too far from you. Some of that you can't do anything about, but some of that can be neglect, right? So that's one way you can differentiate a little bit about, I wonder what this course is like. You take a look at the course as you're either driving by or going to it, whatever, playing it for the first time, and you're going to pick up pretty quick that the greens themselves, how everything is managed within all aspects of the course, you can make a pretty okay determination based on what you can see of the overall grounds. See where I'm going with that? What do you think what happens when somebody pulls up to your organization and they see weeds growing in, through the cracks and in the parking areas and where your employees park and so on and so forth, right? All the way up to the bushes not being trimmed back, next to your building, right? I would add to this, right? The tattered American flag, it's all wind damaged and everything else and hasn't been appropriately replaced, right? So these are the kinds of things that strike us, right? It is that condition. So it speaks about what our values are. It speaks to what we care about. Now, I'm not judging in this sense. Our lives, no life is one that can be played to perfection. We all have seasons days, seasons, months, depending on how you want to describe it, where our attention is taken, right? You may have medical issues and so on and so forth. Do you think your concern for your backyard is what it would have normally been? Probably not, right? But at some point, right, down the line, somebody, whether you pay them or you do it yourself, is going to have to cut down the field, right? that is, that's life. Part of this is life. And so sometimes it's the lack of attention because we're not giving attention. And sometimes it's because we're consumed, our attention is consumed with things of high priority, right? This is why it's difficult. I won't say difficult, some can pretty easily. But you wouldn't call out, your friends going, hey, you got a bunch of weeds growing and your yard looks pretty rough and you should pull those weeds. You wouldn't probably be a good friend anyway, to put it in those terms. But we don't do that. And usually it's because we have some insight to what they're dealing with or what they're, so on and so forth. But individually, it's a different story. Individually, our friends can go, well, whatever, this and that. But as individuals, we can look at our own lives and see our lawn as a metaphor for that. If you're not dealing, this is where that whole concept of shadow work comes from. You think of your lawn and your grounds around your home, for example, if you have a yard. And to the extent that you're neglecting that, right? Let's get away from the all consumed with, emergency situations into normal average daily life, right? If your neglect for your yard, right, speaks about you to others about what you think about your property, right? It's the same way when you are neglecting dealing with issues. If it's one of the isms, right? It could be addictions, isms, codependencies, all these things, right? Codependence on anything, right? Essentially making a crutch of anything or anyone, right? You could be you could be a materialist, right? And your whole identity is wrapped around the material items that you own, for example, right? And if that's the case, to an extent that you're neglecting, say, your family, or neglecting your work, or neglecting taking care of your property or your vehicle, or your pick a number, right? Maybe it's, where you used to contribute in one area of your life, you absolutely don't anymore. So these are the things we have to consider, right, about our own lives. And this is another reason why people aren't going to call out your yard. And why is that? Because they know that their yard or their property has similar issues. So what do we see here in this symbolism, or this? What's the similarity here? We aren't going to call out people that we love or care about that have addictions and isms and codependence and all these things. We aren't going to do it. And why is that? Because then we would have to call ourselves out, right? Now, I don't mean call it out as in, oh, you're terrible. I don't mean that. I mean to be, a heartfelt, good human and with all love and concern kind of a call out, right? To identify something and say, hey, I see, I feel like you're struggling. Is there anything, I can help out with, right? To be a friend, right? To be an ear, to be a bridge to that healing, right? There isn't a need to heal if, there isn't a need to help clean up the weeds in your yard if you don't first, acknowledge, I got some weeds in my yard, right? Or I've got this going on and that going on, and I could use some help, right? If our pride is too much that we won't ask for help, then nothing gets done. Do you think the situation gets worse or better? Does leaving a person alone help them to heal faster or slower? I mean, there's no right answer here, right? There is no right answer. I would think that being an ear, being there to support, and either cheerlead somebody, depending on where they are in their healing journey, cheerlead in some aspects, help out in others, whatever, that would be better, right? but it's probably not going to be true for everybody. There might be some people who want to take other avenues for their own healing, right? If you're a self-help person, right, and you're mostly living solitary, you've been so self-reliant for so long, but have you acknowledged that self-reliance, or your perception or your feeling that you are being self-reliant, are you kind of deluding yourself? You're not really self-reliant, mostly self-reliant, and until you're not, right? But you feel self-reliant, but your attitude becomes one of, well, I can take care of it, I can handle it, I can take care of it, I can handle it. Well, okay, in many instances, that's a good thing, right? But what about those instances where you need help, right? And then now you don't ask for help because before you could handle it, and you wouldn't want people to think you couldn't handle it. Back when my mom was alive, and she was living in a small apartment, kind of like a retired complex kind of thing. And I lived on the other side of the country, and I had gotten her the button, right? You hit the emergency button, which, hey, I think that's a fantastic, thing. But her health was starting to kind of encroach, and she was well aware that once her health got to a certain place where she couldn't manage, right, and she didn't want to move. That was another thing, right? So there was a lot of conditions, right? But once her health got to a place that she would, would probably be time to go to a nursing home, right? And so what do you think she did? She wouldn't use the button when she ought, because she had figured out, well, if I don't use this button, if I'm more, self-reliant and don't use the button, then I can continue to operate, which is true. I mean, I guess if you need a motivator, that's one. The problem is there comes a threshold where you hit a wall. And look, folks, we're all human beings, and we're only going to be here, for a finite amount of time. So some of us, in many forms and fashions, what that will look like. But our pride and ego may be one of the last things to go if we don't recognize that we have weeds in the yard, weeds in the lawn, right? Some things that need to be, shrubs that need to be trimmed up, this and that going on. We need to work on some of these things. And sometimes you might need help, right? It doesn't mean, like in my mom's case, that she would go automatically to a nursing home. That was never a preface, but she had made these connections in her own head, which almost cost her life prematurely because she wouldn't use the button, right? And that's what the button was there for, okay? So these are kind of those kinds of things. You become self-reliant so long, your ego and pride tells you, no, you don't ask for help, blah, 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 right? And so you'll never get help. And then when you get to a place where you need help, now crossing that bridge, and it's so difficult, right? So difficult. It could be a codependence, right? It could be an addiction. It could be something to where emotionally, mentally, physically, we're using others or something as a crutch, right? To sustain ourselves. And we don't want to lose that crutch, right? Because that's gone beyond help now. That's gone beyond help. It's using something as a crutch. So how do we deal with this? How do we, what's the tact and what are the ways we can walk around this? Because this also happens in organizations, folks. The way you keep your outer grounds of your facilities, the way you keep the inner, keep up, everything neat, clean, and serviceable inside your organizations, right? All of it. Policies, all the way to policies, processes, and procedures. It all works inward. That all speaks to what? Quality. So when you come back to that and we look at our own personal lives, we can also make that association too. If the outer grounds are struggling, what do you think the quality as I get inward is going to be? There's going to be issues, right? There may be some isms, but there may be some just situations where people need help or assistance, right? Sometimes you need to, get a consultant to come help. Sometimes it's hiring a position. Sometimes it's, pick a number, but there's many ways to deal with this. But we essentially start to realize that the outer becomes a reflection of the inner, okay? Which could just as easily been the title of this video, right? Is your inner reflective of the outer and vice versa? Now, there are those also too, we have to caveat a little bit and say that there are those who will have manicured yards, manicured external facilities, nice facilities, maybe even in the inside it's pretty good, but then you get into the communication with others, right? Are we treating people with respect, right? Do we have a passion for the customer? Do we have a generally upbeat, glass is half full kind of approach to dealing with each other? Is there a level of synergy, and cooperativeness that, between our team members, right? Now, does this occur within our own lives, right? And that's for you to reflect for yourself. I can't look into everybody's life, right? But I have obviously been around the lives long enough to know that as you go in, then you start to find where the constraints are, right? They're not always going to be curbside. Some of it's going to be communication. Some of it's going to be functional, right? Some of it's going to be part of the communication that closes the loop on stuff, right? Some of it's, hey, do we have radios? Do we use the phones? Do we use PAs? There's functional effects. Is our policies, processes, and procedures, right? Are those in alignment? Are they giving us a clear trail, a clear path to effectively, get the outcomes that we want, right? So similarly, it's, do we have an effective schedule set up on the home front to deal with, maybe it's as we get older, maybe you were retired or whatever, and you're paying somebody to come to your yard. But are you accounting for people being gone and all the things, right? There's contingencies to everything. So are we addressing these things? Well, no different when we start to go within ourselves, right, folks? Because it's not just, our physical functional homes and property. It's not just the physical functional, property and functionality within our professional, working environment, but it's also within our community, right? If you drove by your, and this may hit home for some, you drove by your church and there's 3 feet weeds all around the block surrounding it, right? Or think of it this way. There are weeds all up and down, city streets because people aren't taking responsibility and accountability, as an example. I'm not saying that's everywhere, but it's there's enough places, okay? Drive by a cemetery. It is as well manicured as a golf course. So think of that. What is that telling you? There is nothing left to work on the inside because these folks have passed on, right? All that is left is to take care of is the outer look of what their life represented, which is a noble and appropriate thing. But what does it say about us as living people, day in and day out? If we are honoring those who have passed more than we're honoring our own lives, even to the extent that we're not looking inside of ourselves to see what's going on, what I think it's Joseph Campbell. I'm going to paraphrase because I'll butcher it, but essentially, let me just chop it down. Where your fear is, right? Where your fear is, your treasure is on the other side of that, right? And it doesn't mean you have to go do crazy things that you're fearful of. You should be fearful. There's a natural fear to survival for appropriate reasons, right? You're not going to jump out to, go pet the bears or the bison and all the things, right? We have to apply common sense, right? But generally, where our fear is, on the other side of that is our treasure, right? If you have phobias and all that sort of thing, work on those, right? Work on those things. Some people have PTSD, right? These are serious matters, right? And this is where help is definitely needed. But you have all these different things going on in folks' lives, but the first sign of it is typically on the outer, and that outer can also be, what is our behavior? How am I treating others? This could be community wide, right? This could be within your organization. This could be with your family and your friends, right? What is my behavior, right? What are my thoughts, my words, behavior as a part of what I'm saying? What are my actions? Am I there for people when they need me, right? Not to say we have to drop everything because we may have our plate full, right? And you may be a person, okay, by the way, let's talk to those people. You may be the person that everybody is looking for to help because they've got weeds all over their life. Well, now we're becoming, have to be careful. There's being helpful and serving, and there's being an enabler, right? So there's a fine line. There's a fine line between choosing not to be an enabler and then just being so harsh with people because you don't want to be an enabler, right? So you have to find a sweet spot there where there's some balance. Be truthful and transparent, but kind in your approach, right? Professional if you're at work, right? Same idea essentially, and because all the dots are connected, right? So we don't want to become enablers either, where we're going around, hey, got the tracksuit, got the shirt and the pants, the matching jacket, all that. I've been there, done that. I've been an enabler to help people, thinking, oh, I need to help people. The good kind of obligation, right? Wanting to serve, right? And help, just to be there where the people couldn't do for themselves in certain situations. And again, difficult situation. If anybody's taking care of an ailing parent or loved one or friends and that sort of thing, you know that the caregivers, there's no overwhelm like that of a caregiver, not only physically and functionally, but emotionally and mentally, right? Not to mention loss of sleep and all those things too, right? It can suck the life right out of you. So it's a difficult, it's a balancing act. Let's call it that. And those folks that are doing that, if those aren't angelic humans walking amongst us, I don't know who is. Okay. But to be an enabler, to be like, okay, I'm going to go help. So this is why, I'll give you an example too. This is why when I developed my system, it's not designed to be overly reliant on a consultant, for example. It's designed to make your team, allow your team to be empowered to grow and thrive, as well as the leadership side of the house too, across the board, right? Last thing you want to do is have to be overly reliant on another human, right? That is enabling, okay? You don't want to enable, make people so dependent on you that things can't get done. This is another reason why your policies, processes, and procedures need to be as standardized as they can possibly be. Sure, there's going to be growth and change in that arena, but because if you're expecting one person, you may have a scenario, and I've been in these realms too, where you have, say, a superintendent that's been with an organization for 30, 40 years and then retires, but then nobody ever thought to plan and to find out all the things that that person had wrapped within their entire existence within that organization, right? Single point of failure now has retired. And now people are going, oh my gosh, they may as well be a new startup, a new company, because they have wrapped everything into a person instead of into their policies, processes, and procedures, their standardized practices, right? So, even though we are definitely talking about making sure we're not enabling and we're not, we want folks to be able to take ownership and accountability, we also have to be individually those people who step up to take care of our property and our weeds in the yard of our life, right? Whatever we're applying that to. So that what? Because when we are keeping those up, it isn't to say we're trying to keep up appearances. That's almost it's such an ugly term, right? When you really think about it, it's like, no, not keeping up appearances. Reflective. The inner and the outer need to be reflective. As above, so below. As out, so in, right? It's the same thing. Then you find balance. This is where balance exists. But when we're out of balance, right? This is also within us as human beings, right? So similarly, we can establish some things functionally and physically in our world that directly translate to us as humans and as teams and owners and leaders and all that, that is lacking potentially on the inside, either an inability or lack of capacity or many things. Could be isms as well. So while we also don't want to be overly judgmental, right? We need to be able to see what we're seeing, be astute about that, be clear, have transparency, but at the same time, everybody on all sides has to be accountable and own their part and say, you know what, could have been stronger in this area, definitely need help here, definitely need help there. People that need help are more apt to be able to transform. And the whole concept here is that we transform, right? The journey is a journey of transformation, right? So on that note, hopefully you're having a fantastic day. And I hope your journey of transformation, right, which is essentially growth within your own life, and that for personally and professionally for you, community-wide and so on throughout culture, is a good one. Even if it's not an easy one, I hope it's a good one. Even if there's rocky terrain and you're like, oh, rocky terrain, you know what? If you've identified it and you're still, you're moving on, you're being honest with yourself and you're not deluding yourself and you're allowing yourself to understand, you know what? I'm going to have hard days and I'm going to have days that aren't as hard. But I'm going to keep growing and I'm going to keep transforming because it's helping not only myself and my team, but also the end use customers for product and service, but also community-wide, who are also your customers. So on that note, remember, folks, hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day or more to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. When you do this, not only helping to transform culture, but you're transforming your own life. But don't forget, we can't transform anything on the outside if we're not willing first to transform on the inside. This is so important. All right, folks, have a fantastic day. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.